Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Episode of the E-commerce Edge podcast. It is my incredible pleasure to welcome back Samarth Mehta from Thoughtspark for the third episode in our PIM MDM series for B2B sellers. That is a series all about PIM MDM and its application for manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors. Welcome back, Samarth.
Thank you so much, Jason. It's a pleasure to be back and always a pleasure to chat with you.
It's incredible, mate. We've had a couple of really good sessions already with you and the team over at Thoughtspark. And look, we're going to try to get through a whole bunch of new stuff, new topics, new learnings today. And if we can't get through everything, then we'll episode or a fifth episode, we're going to play this a little bit by ear. And what I want to do is I want to make sure we cover these topics in enough depth that they're actually valuable for any manufacturer, wholesaler, or distributor out there that is seriously considering either an initial implementation of a PIM MDM system in their business or a re-platform project of a PIM MDM system. Because oftentimes, at least when I go in and I'm consulting, sometimes a brand will have a legacy PIM MDM system, something that was maybe fit for purpose a decade ago or 5 years ago or something like that. But their business has changed. Their business has matured. Their business has evolved. They are now looking at implementing new channels that they've never implemented before. They're looking at self-service e-commerce. They're looking at punch-out. They're looking at EDI. They're looking at ways in which they can more effectively get their catalog into the hands of their customers so they can make an effective, efficient buying decision. And now, more than ever before, sellers are wanting to go into B2B specific niche and category specific marketplaces all of their own. So they're going down this playbook path that their D2C and B2C counterparts have been going down for the last decade, and B2Bs are getting omni-channel religion, aren't they?
Exactly. And this is why I think it's very important in this time and age that, first of all, there are still manufacturers and distributors, especially that do not have a PIM. And I think you just cannot survive without one anymore. I think there's just in this time and age, there's no excuse for us to not have one. And the second is after you, let's say, for example, you've purchased a PIM or you're on that journey, and we spoke elaborately about why you should have one and what's the way in which you should have it. But once, let's say you did decide to do it, there's so much that you need to take care of. There's so many gotchas, because I think one of the experiences that I want to share is that one of the philosophies is that I've always told people that PIM implementations are really simple. They're not rocket science, but it's just all the messy stuff that is created by being either underprepared, not knowing what to do, not having the right guidance, that you end up, in a difficult space. I think PIM implementations can be really fun, really simple. And like I said, in this time and age, there's no reason for a distributor, manufacturer, or no matter what kind of a business in B2B are you in, to not have a PIM anymore.
Yeah, I think also with the advent of true cloud native SaaS PIM systems, right? The PIM MDM space has gone through an evolution similar to almost every other category of software in the world, where we started out with this model of on-premise technology that was maybe housed in a server room in the corner of your office, then cloudifying those technologies, moving them, they're still on-premise architecture, but then moving them into public cloud systems like AWS, Google Cloud, etc. And now we've evolved once again to where now the vast majority of software out there is now multi-tenant SaaS, software as a service. So we consume it through a browser. We consume it on a subscription basis. We don't have to think about security. We don't have to think about scalability. We don't have to think about infrastructure and servers and all those other things. We offload that to the vendor of the software, and we just consume that technology through a browser and through APIs. And so this has, I think, not only made all software more accessible to more merchants at a lower cost and lower complexity level, but it has certainly done the same for PIM MDM, because historically, PIM MDM projects were a beast. They were an absolute monster of a project. And especially when you had to think about, okay, what are my server requirements? How much space do I need to house all this critical product data, from images to videos, to descriptions, to attributes, to all the channel specific data that we need, to having all of the ability to track changes against product data. Historically, taking on a PIM project was pretty intimidating, simply because not only did we have to think about getting our data in order to get it into a PIM in the first place, or even getting it organized within the PIM, but then we had to think about what does the implementation look like purely from a technology and support perspective and scalability perspective. And now many of those underlying concerns around the core software capability, we've offloaded that to some really excellent technology vendors out there, so we can focus on what are the business levers that we are now able to pull through the implementation of a PIM MDM system.
Exactly. And I think I think, and you've led this very clearly into what, once you've got a PIM MDM software, right? You're now no longer focused, like you said, it's just about the business value and how do you get the maximum value out of it, right? A lot of times I see when a PIM implementation begins, right? There's a lot of times that these projects can be, let's say, IT driven, right? Because you have somebody in the organization that wants to tick off a box that said, hey, we need a PIM, right? But that did not do enough business value harvesting to go in and define or work with the business to say, this is how it's going to improve your life. These are the major objectives that we can achieve. Because I feel PIM is a once in a lifetime opportunity for most people to look at what they need to do correctly. So I think when you're thinking about a PIM and onboarding a PIM, let's say, even if you made a decision or to go with a particular vendor, the first thing that, in my opinion, you need to start focusing on what is the value that you want to drive from it. And which could really mean that if you're driving this project from an IT point of view, maybe it's a few months of just education on what a PIM can do, what are the capabilities, what can you achieve with the PIM, and what to expect. Because sometimes people will even expect their coffee to be made by the PIM and solve all the world's problems, but it's not going to be true. It's not going to happen in that one implementation. So that is why it's very important to set the right expectations, right boundaries, and then work to define the true business values and outcomes. Because if you don't have clear objectives, you don't have a clear point of view where you're headed, then I think that I see is the biggest risk and a biggest gotcha for any project, even before it starts.
My mother used to have a saying when I was a kid, if you aim at nothing, you will hit it every single time. And I think that this is the case with much of the enterprise software world out there. It does become a box ticking exercise within either marketing or IT or sales or whatever it might be. We bring on this software thinking that it will create success within our business without a strategy and a very clear roadmap to go along with it. And that is just simply not the case. And you and I have seen many failed projects that did not come into it with strategic priorities, objectives, and a strong business case around it. And that's why in our first couple of episodes, we covered all of that off. And we're going to now move into the phases of an implementation. That's what this episode will be focused on. But just a quick recap of some of the things that we have covered off in this series already. Product data as an asset in B2B commerce. What does that look like? How to make the business case around product data as an asset that is worthy of ongoing investment within the business. We got into all the nitty-gritty detail around that and all the business value that can be driven out of data as an asset. Then we started to get into the basics of PIM MDM, product information management, master data management. What does that look like inside of a business and helping to build the business case, the key value drivers. Then we started to get into, okay, great. We've made the business case. The business is bought in. They know we need to do this. Now, how the hell do we pick a PIM platform that we think is going to work well for our business? What are the key value drivers that are important for us? And then how do we match that up with the PIM options that are out there in the market that, based on the 80-20 rule, based on can this platform that we are selecting do at least 80% of our needs and our requirements out of the box without heavy customization, then it should probably be on our short list for consideration. We walked through what some of those key decision-making criteria around selecting a PIM should be and are for businesses that we have seen be successful with implementations of a PIM, and stories from the trenches and stories from the real business world. Now we're moving on to phases of implementation. And one of the things that we wanted to cover off today as a first really big key point was, what do sellers, manufacturers, wholesalers, and distributors need to do in preparation for going ahead or proceeding with the PIM project. And there was a few different things that we called out in our discussions as we were putting together the format and the outline for this discussion today. We said, look, there's three major things here that if you don't do this, you have a high chance of project failure. First is defining the goals for the project. Two, preparing the high-level data. And in many cases, that simply means gathering and aggregating the data from 100 different sources across the business. Then the final piece that we thought would be a massive priority is educating the business and ensuring enough bandwidth is allocated to the project. Because sure, you may have a consultant that comes in and helps you with the strategic planning. You may even have an agency or a partner that's going to come in and actually do the implementation, do the customization, create the business logic, create the business rules inside the system so that you don't have to do that. Create the workflows, the enrichment workflows. You may have somebody that's going to come in and actually set that up inside the PIM system based on your business logic and your business rules inside the business. However, if you do not set aside enough resource internally to guide and handhold and effectively direct and create the blueprint for what these partners are actually going to be implementing on your behalf, then it's never going to see the light of day. So these are really key things, right? So let's take the first one, defining the goals for the project. Now, oftentimes what I see, and I'd love to get your take on this, is that a PIM is expected in many instances to do things that it was never intended to do. It's a PIM in its most basic form is a repository of detailed product data structured in all the ways we need it to be structured for the channels that we want to distribute that data through. And that doesn't necessarily just mean transactional channels. That could be through marketing channels. That could be through shopping comparison website channels. That could be through print catalogs that we maybe need to print out and send to certain customers. That could be through any channel that we need to distribute data through, and not only distribute it through, but collect it via, meaning that we oftentimes, especially as distributors, we might be collecting product data from 100 different manufacturers or suppliers. So we need to have an effective way of collecting the data, aggregating the data, normalizing the data, and then redistributing the data to all the channels we need to get it out to. And in its most fundamental form, that is what a PIM is designed to do. But if we are expecting it to move mountains beyond that core business use case or use cases, we're in trouble out of the gate.
Exactly. And I think this is where a lot of businesses make that mistake. They're trying to go beyond the capabilities of PIM, sometimes going into maybe transactional data. Oh, I want to bring on all my contractual pricing per customer. Or I want to bring on all my supplier specific contracts. And there's a bunch of things that you can keep adding on to this, which will really take you in the wrong direction. Because if you do that, you're not focused on the core features of a PIM that are supposed to drive you to success. It's about breaking down the silos, aggregating, like you said, all your data, and then distributing it. Really fundamental, really simple, but it's very important for the business to understand. And when you're also defining the goals, one of the things that I've realized is that people are not, you can expect to do everything in one big goal, or you need to have smaller milestones to go upwards, right? And I think that's where also it becomes that, you're trying to really, if you have extremely bad quality data, the first probably step or first goal should be maybe just getting that onboarded and cleaning some of it. But if you're going to try to say, oh, you know what, in this project, I'm going to clean all my data, get it to A+ content, and then, do really amazing stuff with it, you're setting up yourself a too big a goal and you're trying to squeeze that into a 3-month, 4-month timeline. You're going to set yourself up for stress and then failure, right? So defining concrete objectives, chewable milestones is very important when you're in this journey.
And I think you make a very good point around the preparing the high level data for injection or upload into a PIM, because in my experience, the vast majority of the time, maybe greater than 80% of the time, the data originates in spreadsheets, right? It comes from Excel, it comes from Google Sheets, it comes from exports to CSV from an ERP system, it comes from other PIM systems, it comes from network drives, it comes from maybe PDFs, maybe images that are stored on network drives as collateral against a specific product, exploded drawings and things like this. But the core product data, meaning like the name, right, the SKU, right? The long description, the product attributes, the structured product data attributes. 9 times out of 10, these are coming out of a spreadsheet somewhere, or they're coming out of another system into a spreadsheet and then being uploaded in the first place into the PIM. Now, from there, the PIM system oftentimes can truncate or concatenate different fields to bring it together and create new attributes out of that. Or using Gen AI, we can take certain keywords out of the name and turn those into attributes, or take keywords out of a description and turn those into attributes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, generally, I find that the data originates in spreadsheets when it gets uploaded to the PIM.
Exactly. And I think this is where, when you're starting up a project, right, you need to understand, or you need to have done some homework on your own data, right? Because what happens is, when you're in the weeds and you're in the project timeline and everybody's committed to, oh, we're going to do this in 3 months. And all of a sudden, you're in the situation where now you're trying to figure out, oh, where's my data? You really don't know. And I've been in conversations like that, right? Where you have no clue who owns the data or where it resides, and all of that. So I think doing a basic homework right before you start, getting all the data together. Okay, where's my product at? And it's a simple exercise, honestly speaking. You don't need to try to figure out everything, go and talk to 100 people. You just need to figure out, what are the consumers of my data? Work backwards, who's providing this data to those consumers, and where does it sit right now? And it just, then you have the entire link. And we're not expecting in this phase for you to really try to transform it into anything else. But in this phase, before you start, at least understand what that flow looks like and where your data really resides. Because then when a consultant comes on, when you get into the design, you'll have the data files, you'll have points to talk across, you'll have something to send them across to analyze and come back to you with the details, right? So this gives the consultants a great perspective of how to start, right? So this can get them starting with really hit the ground running. That's the goal. So I think this is an extremely important point that we should focus on.
I call this phase data discovery. That's what I call this phase. When I'm going in and I'm talking to my clients, it's okay, where across the business does your product data generally sit today? When your sales reps, for example, are talking to one of their key account customers and their customer says, hey, send me across this spec sheet. Hey, send me across this price list. Hey, send me across XY. Hey, send me across this exploded drawing. Hey, send me across this zip file of this information around this product, or the specification data, or the load bearing data, or whatever it is around highly engineered products in most instances. Where does that usually, where does the sales rep go in your internal systems to find this information that 9 times out of 10 today is being attached to an email and it's being sent to the customer as an email? Or they've got Dropbox set up and they dump all this information into a folder for their customer in Dropbox, and they say, here's the link to the Dropbox. You can go into this folder and you can download all this collateral around these products, right? Where is the source, the root source of all this amazing data that your sales reps are going and scouring internal network drives and their desktop and everything else? Where are they getting this data from? And I think just asking that question primarily of salespeople in a B2B organization, it is the salespeople that act as the conduit for getting crucial product data into their customers' hands so they can make a buying decision. So oftentimes I find that in the B2B world, your sales team are the best people to ask the question, where does this data come from?
Exactly. No, I totally agree with you. And that is, and it's as simple as that. Honestly, there's no rocket science to it. It's just digging deeper and finding out where your data is.
Yeah, no question about it. Now, once we get there and we go, okay, we've got some data coming out of an ERP. We've got some data coming out of a network drive. Maybe we've even got some data in a print catalog that we're going to need to convert and we're going to need to scan to a digital equivalent. Or maybe we're, as a distributor, we're getting some data from some of our suppliers and they're sending it across as a link. Maybe they send us a spreadsheet of a bunch of URL links to a bunch of information, maybe sitting on an AWS drive somewhere that we can download this information, right? So once we know where the data is coming from, then we have to start to collect it. We have to start the next stage of the process, which is organizing it in some sort of meaningful, consistent way. And that usually takes the form of a template that we have our mappings that we bring. Those mappings start to bring consistency regardless of the source of the data. It starts to bring some crucial consistency to that data, and that's where a consultant or a specialist or an implementation partner, they can help you create these standardized templates. And sometimes it's by category of product, because sometimes there's a different template by category because they've got all different attributes by category, but they can help you create those standardized templates. You can then start to aggregate your product data into in preparation for upload into the PIM system.
Exactly. And I think that standardization process, as that's going to be the key part of it. And I think in order to start even on that standardization journey, right? And this is where I think now we're getting into that next phase of once you've prepared your data, you're ready with your objectives and you want to get into that design phase, right? The first thing that I really, usually as consultants that I advise to work closely with the business is to define the data dictionary, right? This is the Bible, the holy Bible for the PIM implementation. In all honesty, this is the single most important document that I think that people need to understand clearly. And I think the business needs to contribute heavily into this, because it's not that we want the business to do everything, because once the consultants have the data files, they can come up with a basic version of a data dictionary or the first draft of the data dictionary. But this is the opportunity for the business to step in and say, hey, you know what? Here's my wish list of fields that never existed. Here's, as engineering, hey, this is the data that I just have in some Word documents here that should be really on the product, right? This is where you're starting to now build the first draft of the 360 view of your product, right? Here's where you will define all the attributes that you will need on the product. Here's where you'll say, okay, these are the channel specific fields. Okay, here's what I need to sell on EDI. Here's what my e-commerce portal needs. Here's some specifications that I really think would help users to buy certain things, right? So you need to really think this through. And this, like I said, is the Holy Bible, where I feel that we will definitely include this as an attachment to this podcast, that we should definitely share the template with our listeners. But the point is that a lot of times not enough effort is given in, or thought is given in from the business, because everybody looks at it as a mechanical way, right? Okay, here's the data I gave you, just take all the attributes from there. And no, but this is the time to really fix the attributes. Let's say you have the same attribute in 3 different systems and it all points to different things. Can we aggregate, cleanse it into something that's more meaningful? Who's the owner of each of the field, right? Defining a concrete ownership. A lot of times we've been in so many conversations where there's either ambiguity, meaning 2 people own the same field and they both just represent their own versions of it in their systems because they're on different channels, or nobody owns a field, or or nobody knows who owns the field and the data just exists, right? And in either cases, it's such a big issue, because remember that in the future of AI, in the future of smart selling and all of these amazing experiences, how are you going to do it without having clarity on data? So my point of view is that this data dictionary, first of all, the fields as you're defining, the ownership that you define, and channel specific details, you really need to get deep in there. And once you've done that, then the next phase comes in for this data dictionary, where you start to define the rules, like what is mandatory, what do I really need to sell this product, what would be a good to have. So you start to define those rules that could then go into the PIM system. So in a nutshell, just to summarize, right, I think data dictionary, in my opinion, is the single most important document. And I think every business person that is sponsoring the project, or is a big part of the project, should understand this document. And the product owners who are responsible for the PIM within the organization should take like a lot of effort. And this is, I think, at max a 2 to 4 weeks effort for the business to really define a concrete data dictionary. But in those 2 to 4 weeks, really, that's all that you should be focused on.
It's going to be setting yourself up for success. It literally sets you up for success or failure with the actual PIM implementation itself. And I want to discuss 2 concrete examples of how projects that you and I have worked on, where this has been mission critical, even inside the business. They said, this has been the best experience we have had to go through this handheld process of creating a data dictionary, because in one case, it was a shoe manufacturer, a children's shoe manufacturer. They had over 800 product attributes in their business just relating to children's shoes. Now, some of these were attributes that related to the manufacturing side of the business. So all of the components of the tech packs that the manufacturer needed to provide, the contract manufacturer needed to provide back to the business so that they could do things like set their pricing, so that they could build up the marketing and sales-based attributes based on the manufacturing attributes, or create a translation layer where they go, okay, here's the actual color down to the exact specifications that we're using on this product, but that's not marketing or consumer friendly. So what's the mapping between the manufactured color and the sales color that we're going to use? What are the attributes of, for example, of certain sizes and certain styles? What needs to roll up to the parent of that product versus what attributes of the parent need to roll down to the child or need to be variant, meaning size and style specific? What attributes need to sit at those different layers of the product, and why? And how does that then get presented to the customer on the sales channel side, whether it be through a digital sales channel like e-commerce, or whether it be through these catalogs that we're now generating for our retail partners? Because they were a manufacturer, they were selling to a lot of retail chain stores globally. And each of those chain stores had their own requirements of how they wanted to receive this product data so that they could then merchandise these shoes in their own print catalogs and in their own retail stores and on their own websites themselves. So we had a process of, and there was a different understanding in the business for some of these attributes. So they had an attribute. Then if you'd ask a marketing team member what that attribute meant, they would have a definition of what that attribute meant. If you asked a sales team member or an account manager in the business that was selling to retail what that attribute meant, in their mind, that attribute had a different meaning. Then if you spoke to finance, had a different meaning for that attribute as it contributed to assessing COGS and setting their pricing tiers and doing all these things. So the exact same attribute in the business can sometimes be interpreted differently by different people in the business. And so this exercise of creating a data dictionary makes sure that you have a consistent understanding of what these product attributes mean across the entirety of the business, or at least you can go down the path of getting on the same page of what these attributes mean. Because if we all have different understandings of the attributes, then you're going to be pretty upset if you're a merchandiser and your definition is not the one used in terms of the mapping to a website, for example. You're going to be pretty upset if your attribute is not supported.
Exactly. And this is where I feel, like you said, right? It's an incremental process. And when you're in this journey, it just looks like so huge a goal going into. And when you look at the first time, and this is for our listeners as well, that when we put the template and if you download it, you're going to be like, holy crap, this is so complicated. But honestly, it's not something that you do in one go, where you can slice and dice and incrementally build this up over a journey of 2 to 4 weeks. But it's just going to totally, the quality of a data dictionary, in my opinion, is directly proportional to the effort put in by the product owner and the business teams in defining it, right? If you're just going to use it as a way to, okay, I just dump some fields and get done with it, and that, then you're not going to come out. But if once business starts discussing it and getting into the weeds, they're really going to find a lot of value out of this data dictionary. And I think this is the fundamental of any PIM is how you structure the data, right? What we call data modeling. And this is the direct input into that data modeling phase. So if your implementers are not going to be able to control the quality of the model or the quality of the data without having this as an input. So I think if anyone who's starting a PIM implementation with any consulting team, they should make sure that they are really focused on this in the first phase of the project, on this heavily.
I think you make a very good point, which is when you are starting to build up the data dictionary, there might be one person in the business that's literally only responsible for one attribute or one column of attributes, right? You might have the marketing team that's responsible for 3 or 4 attributes. You might have the merchandising team that's responsible for 3 or 4 attributes. You might have the ops side of the business that's responsible for all the manufacturing and the tech packs, and the internal design team. If they're a manufacturer, maybe the internal design team is responsible for a collection of attributes. And then you have the sales team, which sometimes are responsible for a completely separate set of attributes. Then you have the finance team that is responsible for a completely separate set of attributes, right? They might define the original name of the core name of the product as it sits in the ERP, for example. And so I think to your point, it can seem overwhelming when you've got 56 columns and you've got 50,000 rows, right? And you're thinking, God, okay, I've got 50,000 SKUs that need all these columns of data populated against them before we can even start selling these products in a meaningful way across all these different channels. And it can feel overwhelming, but when you start to split that up and say, okay, sales, marketing, merchandising, you're responsible for these attributes. Hey, ops, you're responsible for these attributes. Hey, fulfillment, you're responsible for assigning them to a warehouse attribute, or you're responsible for assigning them these different attributes. Hey, finance, you're responsible for this set of attributes. Once you start kind of parcelizing that out across the business, it suddenly becomes a lot less overwhelming, because when that team sees their column, they immediately know what they need to be doing with that column.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with you. And that's how post everything gets organized in the data dictionary. That's how life is going to be like in the future, right? And this is where I want to now step into the second most important part of the design phase, which is going to be around the governance, right? So you're going to start talking about, okay, who are going to be the users that are going to really come on the PIM, and what should the experience be for them? So for an example, you and you're a marketing person, and I'm, let's say, just an image person, right? So I'm just going to go, and I'm part of the photo team, and I need to make sure I get the images and things like that. Now, how do we both collaborate together on the PIM? And how do we make it as a seamless end-to-end experience? And this is where I think the PIM gives you the ability to define a workflow, a process flow, which fits your organization. Because no two organizations, in my opinion, while most of them have the same underlying fundamentals, no two organizations are going to have the exact identical flow. So you want to be able to set up that flow. So it's very important to understand, how does your product data flow through the organization? Who's the first one that really gets that data in? Who's the one that needs to work on it afterwards? Who's the one that needs to add some channel specific information? And what's the order in which do they go? Do they work parallelly? Do they work together? Do they work one after the other? Because this will avoid a whole bunch of emails in the organization about, hey, you need to work on this product. Hey, I need this product. No, it's all in one system in a consistent flow when you're introducing a new product. Who are the people that need to approve when you make updates or changes to the product, right? If you define these criteria very clearly into a kind of like a flow within your organization between the users, then it can be easily replicated into the system. So I think the other key component, apart from defining the data model, is going to be the governance piece, where you really need to try to understand. And this is where I think most great consultants will drive you through that exercise. But it's also important for you as a business, as a user, to understand what is expected of you. Just trying to lay that over here from a governance point of view.
I think of it almost like a relay race, right? It's a baton that needs to be, or a baton, if you're American, that needs to be passed from one person to another in the business. Yeah. Maybe the first person to touch a product in the business is the design team, and they create the design, the look, the feel, the tech pack. Maybe the next team in the business is the contract manufacturing team, and they send some data back around the last in the case of a shoe or something like that, or spec that they need to then enrich. Then maybe it goes to the marketing or merchandising team from there to enrich further. And then maybe the sales team starts to add in some of their product information. And this is the baton of product enrichment needs to be passed from team to team or individual to individual, so that it starts out as a naked product with maybe just a name and a SKU, and then it ends up coming out the other end of the sausage factory after you've passed the baton around the business across maybe 5 or 6 different people in the business. Then it comes out the other end, and it's this beautiful product ready to be sold in the market across all different sorts of channels and be ready to merchandise across all different sorts of formats. And we want to have this be an ordered workflow. And I also want to talk about the differentiation of almost like the Moscow method of data, right? Saying, okay, here's our must-have data to be able to sell a product. Here's our minimum level of enrichment we need to have before we can even put a product on sale. Then here's some of our nice to have data, which is, hey, it's going to probably help us convert higher. It's probably going to help us sell better. It's going to help us merchandise better. It's going to help customers make better decisions and lower return rates. If we have, for example, color swatches might, for example, be a nice to have piece of data around a fashion item, for example. It's going to reduce returns, etc. Then we have our wish list data. Cool. Once we've got through the must-have data and the nice-to-have data, here's some wish list data that if we added this last 10% of data, we think our conversion rate would go up by 0.5% because of XYZ reasons. And here's the business case for spending that extra time and energy doing that wish list item of data. Or we have a specific whale customer. If we're a distributor and we have a specific whale customer who said, hey, we'd love it if you added this data to your data feed for us so that it helps us sell your product better at scale. So I think breaking down that minimum level of enrichment, that MVP, minimum viable product of data that will allow you to get up and running, but knowing that there is some nice to have data, and then there's some wish list data that you're probably, once you go live, after you're live with the PIM, then you can start adding retroactively some of the nice to have and some of the wish list data to get you to that better place of data enrichment.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the analogy, the way that you put it about the baton, because that's exactly how, it really is, right? And then it's as simple as that again. And like we said, it's all simple stuff. It's just that you need to understand the fundamentals and keep going on from there. And the third piece that I usually like that during the design phase is that one of the things that we usually don't think about is how the PIM is going to sit into your organization and what are all the pipelines that you need in and out with all the other systems, right? Because with cloud native systems, I think it's fantastic and it's extremely great that you can onboard and run quickly. But it also means that there's already available APIs and out of the box ways in which you can connect to it. It's extremely important for the organization to start understanding how the data needs to flow, and that way you can really connect it into the PIM. So and with that, we covered the three pillars, right? We set up the data foundation with the data dictionary. We define the governance, the people angle of who's going to use the system, how they're going to use it, what access do they have, and those kind of things. And then you go to the technology side of things, that how do we automate all of the flow between the systems, the communication, so that it's a seamless, real-time, faster experience for all the people, right? And defining these three pillars is extremely important in the right way during the design phase, because and this is why I think that a lot of times when customers tell me that they want to do agile, they really want to go into doing everything. Oh, let's just start with something and we'll build something out every 2 weeks. No. What I've always, even then, I still prefer to organize my sprints into this way where we focus on data, get to governance, then get to technology, and then meanwhile, of course, delivering value as an outcome in an agile way. But I still like to define the end milestone in each of these areas, because otherwise you complete your data exercise and then now you're thinking, oh, but it would be nice to have, because I spoke to one user and he said he needed this field. Oh, I didn't think about it at that time. So it's always nice to organize yourself into these three areas when you're going into a design phase.
And I think as part of governance, there's three major components to governance that I see businesses, especially in the B2B world, oftentimes overlook. It's, first of all, it's the workflows that we just discussed, the enrichment workflows. They don't really have a clearly defined workflow within the business, and therefore there's no clearly defined permission set that needs to be allocated to different people or groups within the business that need to manage those different phases of the workflow, because we now need to have permissions. And it's not just permissions in terms of their phase of the work and handing off that baton, but it's also which attributes are assigned to them in terms of the workflow so that they only can access and modify attributes that they're responsible for, so that they don't end up messing else's attributes by mistake, for example, when they do an upload of a CSV or something like that. And so I think part of governance is not just the workflow, but it's the permission structure, the attribute assignments that go along with that, and then finally, the audit trail. And any good PIM system worth their salt has an audit trail, meaning it will show you the history of an attribute for the entire life cycle of that product. Who touched it? Who modified it? Who created it? Who edited it? And then also be able to roll forward and roll back across that entire edit an audit timeline of a product's life cycle, being able to roll forwards and roll back if a mistake happens and you need to roll back to a previous version of the data, being able to do that seamlessly and easily, that is a piece that actually comes from the technology. Basically, unless the technology has an audit trail built in and the ability to roll backwards and forwards across versions, you're going to have to do that manually yourself. And so that's a place where the tech, actually all three of these phases, the workflow phase, the permissions phase, and the audit trail phase, this has to be supported by the technology. Otherwise, you're simply not going to be able to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely, totally agree. And then I think, and just to add one more piece to this is that the fact that most PIM within the governance will also support to create these custom business rules, right, which are more applicable to your business, right? Defining requirements for, so this is where you will also define data requirements and say what is mandatory, what is not mandatory at each step of the process, what you need to do, the bare minimum that you need to do to move forward. Right. So those are the kind of questions that you need to ask. And again, this can sound all very complicated when we're talking about this, right, from 30,000 feet. But at an execution, you and I have been in multiple projects, right? You just need to simply so this is where it's very important that to go in the right order. If you try to define the business rules, if you try to put the cart before the horse, you're going nowhere, right? So if you've defined your process flow, then you know that, okay, what is it that my merchandiser needs to do? It's a simple question to ask, right? But if I don't know my flow yet, and then I'm trying to define the rules for it, it's just not going anywhere. So this is where I feel that the business rules is another important angle within the governance umbrella, apart from the three that you added. And it is extremely important for people to keep this in mind, that things need to happen in a certain sequence for you to arrive at the right objective. Because if you start haphazardly, you're pretty much not going to get anywhere and waste a lot of time, energy, and resources.
And I think to your point around business logic, a lot of businesses don't understand that the way that they structure their internal logic that humans are managing today, that a lot of that logic can oftentimes, as long as it's a consistent rule set and they follow it consistently in the business today, then oftentimes that can be converted into programmatic logic inside the PIM. And I'll give you one example. So a lot of my customers, when I first start talking about PIM, they're like, oh, we've got 50,000 images on a network drive for these products. And if we have to manually upload product data via CSV, and then we have to go into each one of those products in the PIM, and we have to attach an image file to that product, it's going to take us 2 years to do that. Yeah. But then when you dig a little bit further, what you may find is that on that network drive, either the folder that the image is in or the file name of the image, for example, oftentimes the file name of the image, they might have an internal rule. Hey, for every file image that's related to a product, we use the SKU as the file name with a hyphen and then the number of the variant, for example, right? And that's how we know, okay, cool, this image relates to this product. If there's consistency to that, and we say, okay, we can now upload these 50,000 images to the PIM system into the image directory in the PIM, and then we can simply run a script, or we can have business logic in there that says, okay, as we go through all these image file names, we just automatically link this image to this product based on its SKU or its hyphenated variant number. And as long as there's consistency, that logic, we can automate that entire process so that it's not a manual process. That's just one example of business logic that can actually be implemented inside the PIM to not only make onboarding of the PIM easier, but ongoing extension of the data in the PIM to make that process automated as much as possible. We can do that in a good PIM system.
Exactly. And I think automation should be another focus area. So I think just coming back to the fundamental, you should really focus on ensuring that the quality of the data gets improved as an objective, as an outcome. Once you've done this exercise, you've defined better attributes, better fields, better permissions. So in general, you just have better quality of data. You should improve your efficiency by ensuring great workflow, collaboration, and also ensuring automation with the business rules that you're defining, and then a seamless integration, right? Again, gaining more efficiency where you're able to send data seamlessly to other systems, communicate between systems without having, because I remember there's a lot of customers where the legacy systems would be like, okay, I've sent some data and then it appears in the next 15 minutes, or it'll appear maybe next week sometimes. So it's just that it's messy integrations that need to be cleaned up also as a part of a PIM implementation. So I'd say, those are the, key fundamentals to defining the outcomes of a design phase as you're thinking about the data, the governance, the technology areas.
No question about it. Listen, we've covered an incredible amount of content in this short period of time, but I think your key points here, data dictionary, got to start with that. We got to start with a universal understanding what our data means across the entirety of the business. And if there is no universal understanding, we have to get a universal understanding to where we can all agree this is what the data means to us as a business. Then we have to think of workflows, governance, permissions, audit trail. We have to think of just holistically. We have to think, what does governance need to look like in our business so that as a product gets enriched, who owns each stage of the process and who owns each attribute, and who's going to make sure that they define what is the must-have, what is the nice-to-have, and what is the wish list of the data around this. What do we need to launch our products with as a minimum standard to be able to get live with a product across our sales channels? Then finally, okay, cool. What does the technology need to support inside our business from a workflow perspective, from a governance perspective, from an audit trail perspective, but more importantly, from an integration perspective? Because oftentimes some of these steps in the flow, these are automated steps, meaning we have business logic or we have input from another system via API that handles that phase of an enrichment. And so what does the process look like? And then how do we streamline that? How do we automate that? And how do we bring efficiency to our data workflows? We've covered some great information today. I appreciate it, Samarth. I cannot wait for our next one, maybe two episodes to where we can get through the rest of where the rubber meets the road of an actual PIM implementation inside a business. You're a legend. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jason. Always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.